This week on Act Out, colonialism didn't just happen, it's still happening. Natives weren't just here hundreds of years ago, they're still here. We sit down with Jen Deerenwater to discuss the colonialist paradigm, anti-native behaviors in the everyday, and two spirits in a singular world. From tweets to marching in the streets, this is Act Out.
Rockets! Blockade! Bulldozers swarm outside the checkpoint gate. An orange flash broke the hush and blew me into the street. I awoke next to the body of my baby. No!
Welcome to Act Out. I'm Eleanor Goldfield, and this is your tipping point. So we've got another special episode this week. The rights and cultures of the people indigenous to the so-called United States have risen slightly on the radar of alternative media and radicals, particularly during and since the pipeline fight at Standing Rock. Ironically, though, that subtle rise only served as a solemn reminder of how much we don't consider or care about Native peoples and cultures in this country. Indeed, a lot of Americans don't even realize that natives are still here. Hundreds of tribes and thousands of people and nations that maintain sovereign governments and lands despite a steadfast colonialism. But those histories are so often just folded into our whitewashed writings of a manifest genocide, a destiny determined by white supremacy, colonization, rape, murder, and forced assimilation. But of course, there's so much more to it than the narrow lens offered by our crusades. And on this show, we covered a lot of the work being done by Indigenous youth, elders, leaders in general, to not only combat capitalist colonialism, but to protect air, land, water, and people. So expanding that viewfinder a bit further, we sat down with Jen Deerenwater to discuss the colonialist paradigm, anti-native behaviors in the everyday, and two spirits in a singular world. Take a look.
So the term Two-Spirit it's a contemporary English language term that's meant to be part of sort of a pan-Indian queer movement. So what it is it's a representation of multiple gender roles that many of our nations have had. My nation, the Cherokee Nation, we had more than two genders. The Lakota had more than two genders. Like that was very common. The Dene did as well. And it was through the white invasion and forced Christianity that we've lost a lot of that history. Some of the first Native people who were attacked and murdered and harmed by the colonizer were multi-gendered people. So we've lost a lot of that history, and that's something that a lot of us who are on the queer spectrum and who are Native, we're trying to find that history and bring that back. I myself feel a responsibility to speak with our queer and two-spirit elders to hear their stories, hear what they saw growing up, what their families went through.
Talk about how the colonization has suppressed the two-spirit culture in Native cultures as well.
So there's a lot of just, I think all oppressed people have internalized their oppression, and that's something that we have to battle, and that includes Native people dealing with internalized colonialism. There are a lot of Natives that think that the only genders we've ever had are men and women, and they have forgotten that history, partially because the history hasn't been taught. Some of as I mentioned, some of the first natives who were being attacked and murdered were two-spirit people. They were thrown into pits of hungry dogs. They were murdered. We've had a lot of people who were put in boarding schools, and not everybody that went to the boarding schools was cis and straight. Mm-hmm. And so there's just a lot of that history that's been beaten out of us, much like we've lost a lot of our ceremonies and songs and dances and languages. We've also lost that history of multiple genders. And you can see that playing out both in non-Native mainstream society and in the non-Native queer community. And you see that within our own Native nations. There's just that lack of remembrance that a lot of people have. And so we now struggle as a people to find a place both in our own Native nations and within non-Native communities.
And of course, that's a very powerful tool of colonization, is to amputate people from their culture, because then if there's nowhere for them to go, then they become assimilated, and with the boarding schools.
Right.
So that's a really powerful and disgusting tool. Talk about the two spirits in the LGBTQ world? Are they recognized? Is there space for them?
Not really. I don't want to say that we don't have non-native queer accomplices, because we do, but there's very little recognition of us. Most people have never even heard the term Two-Spirit. They in general don't even think about Native people. I recently saw a study, I can't remember, I think it was 64% of Americans don't actually believe that Natives still exist. So on any level of the work that we're doing for our rights as Indigenous people, we're constantly just having to start at this place of reminding non-natives, like, we still exist and you're on our land. And that's true in the queer community. I mean, these pride parades and rallies and things that happen, Native people are never consulted. Two-Spirits are never included. So really, as an Indigenous person, I don't see myself being reflected in the community. But furthermore, something else that I think is really important is that as a Two-Spirit, it's not just my gender identity, it's also, it's a role. It's a sacred role that I have to play within the Indigenous communities. Like, there are certain things that Two-Spirit people did. And ceremony, taking in orphan children, negotiating with the colonizer, like, we have a lot of roles. And so my responsibility as a Two-Spirit is much different than my role as a bisexual.
Right. And it's also really interesting that you say that there were specific roles that Two-Spirits had, because the way that the colonizers think of the LGBTQ community is like, oh, well, you're beneath everyone else. Whereas it sounds like the Two-Spirits were not necessarily above, but they were considered special and different in a good way, as opposed to different in this, oh, gross, you're weird in a bad way.
Right. Yeah.
So shifting or continuing with that sort of anti-native perspective, I wanted to talk, because you also have some powerful insight with regards to anti-native behaviors in social circles, such as healthcare and housing. Talk a little bit about those experiences that unfortunately are likely to not only happen to you, but natives across the board.
So a lot of natives, not all, but a lot of natives, whether res-based, which is reservations, they're urban, they're on allotment land, a lot of us still have to rely very heavily upon the federal government and state governments to keep us alive, which that's not something we used to have. Every nation is different, but we hunted, we fished, we gathered, we grew crops, we took care of ourselves. We were independent people working together as a community. But then as the government came in and dammed rivers, we have horrible pollution because of pipelines and uranium mining. They killed the bison. I mean, I could go on and on about the things they did, but as a result, it was an attempt to take our cultures, but also to control us. If you have a people that can't even feed themselves, then you can control them. And that's a lot of what happened. And I feel that a lot every day. I'm multiply disabled, and I rely upon the government for my health care. I rely upon them for helping me keep a roof over my head. And I think that's terrifying in general for people who are in that position, because you never know what's going to happen with the federal budget. You don't know what's going to happen with state government. You're constantly living on edge, hoping that you don't lose your housing, you don't lose your health care or your food or whatnot. But I think it's particularly difficult for natives because this is our land, and we don't even think of land as something to own. We think of it as something to care for, but this is still our land. And here we are having to rely upon our colonizer to keep us alive when they never intended for me to be here. They meant to wipe my people out and so that we would be gone. So it's difficult, and then in terms of healthcare, so many of our native relatives have to rely upon the Indian Health Services, which is a federal run program. It's federally funded. I can't remember the exact amount, but it's $1, I think $1.52 is what's allocated to each native under IHS. There's no cultural competency in the medical system in general for us. I cannot even tell you the amount of times I've gone to doctor's appointments or gone in for procedures or for surgeries and had people say deplorable things to me. George Washington Hospital here in DC, I am repeatedly inundated with really disrespectful questions and comments about my ethnicity, my indigeneity. And so when you're having to rely upon all of these people that don't understand who you are and don't even care to understand who you are, you're just constantly being re-traumatized every day.
Right. And it also seems like a further attempt to kind of like a boarding school, like to keep you, like, could you just be less indigenous? Could you just be less of who you are?
Yeah.
And then we'd find it easier to deal with you.
Yeah.
And also to that point, the life expectancy for indigenous people in the U.S. is far below the national average for other groups, and health problems are more ubiquitous as well. And part of that is, of course, because there aren't resources. Resources are
Right.
not allocated, and it's kind of like, could you just
Yeah.
yeah.
Yep.
And with that, another thing I want to touch upon is because people think of colonization as something that happened a long time ago and now it's over and we're all cool. So it's sort of like this idea of like it's not gone, but it's forgotten. So talk about like, maybe a few examples of how colonialism is perpetuated every day outside of the examples that you just give, and also how non-natives could check their colonialist behaviors rather than perpetuating them.
Okay. Well, right now, one of the things, one of the issues that as a nation we're really talking about is the migrant children who are being separated from their families. But in that conversation, we're not talking about how most of those children and those people are indigenous. They're indigenous to the so-called Americas. That's not really being talked about. And it's also not being talked about, that the US government has this very long history of taking Native children from our families, whether it's the boarding schools, it's incarcerating our youth, it's adopting them out to white families. Like, this is not new. What we're seeing is not new. And this is a form of colonization. And the fact that there is this larger definition of who is an immigrant, and it never includes white people, is also a form of colonization. Because if you are not of this land and you didn't come here on a slave ship, then you're an immigrant. And that conversation is never had. And as long as America as a nation exists upon this land, then settler colonialism will exist. And that's something that we all have to fight, including non-natives. The first acts of racism and white supremacy that occurred here were done upon my people. And that conversation is never had. And, in movements around ending police brutality, hardly ever talk about the fact that natives actually have the highest rates of murder by police. We have the highest rates of incarceration. And I don't say that because I'm trying to play Oppression Olympics, but this needs to be remembered. Like, colonization has never ended. Just because you don't recognize it and you don't recognize natives doesn't mean it's stopped. And all of these movements, regardless of what the movement is, they need to be meaningfully including indigenous people. They need to add a decolonization lens to the work they do. They need to bring indigenous people, community members, tribal leaders into these movements and do that in a meaningful way. And also remember that because we have over 500 years of this genocide, we're a little skeptical of non-natives. We're not going to necessarily jump at the chance to be a part of your movement because you invite us in. We need to know that you're going to be there for us on an ongoing basis. I saw a lot of that with Standing Rock, where non-natives, particularly white people, were so gung-ho to go out to the res, but they didn't really do anything. A lot of them didn't really contribute to the cause. And in their minds, DAPL's done. And so they've moved on to the next issue and have left behind the indigenous communities.
I think that's an interesting point too, because I in a couple of trainings that I've done recently, I've brought up the talking to fellow white folks. I've said things like, don't take it personally if a person of color, indigenous, what have you, seems standoffish towards you. This isn't like a personal prejudice. It's a mode of survival.
Right.
And it's a mode of survival that's been passed down, just like the trauma that has perpetuated this mode of survival. So instead of taking it personally, like, well, that person's rude, think of it as that historical mode of survival.
And with that, it's also like we need to remember the history of infiltrators,
Yeah.
both historically and present. Even amongst Native people, we can be very skeptical with one another just because of the history that we've had with our own people sometimes being turned against us, like by the FBI or such. Um, so that's another issue. We have to always be aware of that. Like, is this person really coming to us in what we call a good way? But also, is this somebody who could flip on us?
Yeah.
If the FBI, DOJ, any of those people came in and started threatening them, like, is this person going to flip? Or are they going to stand strong and stay with the movement and stay with the people? So even amongst our own, we have that issue of distrust.
In terms of organizing, how do you feel is the best way to avoid tokenizing Native voices and not just bringing them in for like the Instagram shot or what have you? What do you feel are some really good ways to really incorporate that decolonization lens into organizing?
Well, like I said, you have to add that lens and you have to bring us in meaningfully. I have definitely felt tokenized in some movement work that I have done, particularly when the DAPL fight was really in the minds of non-natives. I felt like as a journalist, I was being asked to write all these articles about Indigenous issues, which of course that's part of what I write about and I care about that. And I'm thankful for when I get published. But where are all those editors and publishers now? I'm not getting the same invitations to write articles. It's the same thing with organizing work. I have definitely been brought into organizations where I felt like, oh, they care about Indigenous people. But then when I would try to talk to them about their own non-native behaviors, then I was just kind of thrown to the wayside. So it's not enough to just bring us in when there's like a hot topic. Like
Right.
You need to have us there at all times. And you need to be recognizing our history. You need to learn our history. And you also need to learn that there isn't just one Native story. There are thousands of Native stories because we have so many nations and we're not a racial group. We are sovereign people. Like I am a citizen of both the United States and of the Cherokee Nation of Oklahoma. And that is left out of a lot of movement work. Even just the recognition that you're organizing on Indigenous land is left out. So we need to be brought in, and it's not just enough to bring us to the table and have us at the table doing the organizing work, have giving input and such. If people aren't really interested in decolonization and giving up their privilege as settlers, that's really important, is remembering that regardless of what brought you to the U.S., you are still on Indigenous land. And you have to recognize that, and you have to respect that, and you have to respect what we've been through, what we're going through, and what we're still facing going forward.
Yeah, that humility bit is really important. Being willing to be taken down a notch and willing to be. I don't like to use the word called out because it feels so like calling people out on Twitter or something. But like being called out like in a meaningful way, like, hey, that was really fucked up what you said and here's why, and being able to take it and be like, okay, cool, and sit with it, as opposed to just immediately being on the defensive, like, well, I didn't mean, you're misunderstanding. It's like, shut up for a second and take it in and like think about how the programming, and this is something that I talk about on the show a lot, is like the programming of the system. Like it's impossible for you to be born in this system and not, if you're white, not be racist and not have like a consumerist drive and not be like, you're programmed that way, but you can fight against it.
Right.
But that doesn't mean that you're not going to slip up. And if somebody is good enough to call you out on that, be accepting of it as opposed to being defensive.
Right.
So in that same vein, one of the things that you do is that you work with either with organizing or journalism to educate people on this, particularly non-natives, able-bodied people. But there is like people that exist on that privilege spectrum also need to take it upon ourselves, like you said, like learn our history, take it upon ourselves to educate ourselves, so that, for instance, a Native person doesn't have to relive trauma in order to explain something to someone, or it just gets annoying to have to say it 100 fucking times. Talk a little bit about, taking that initiative to educate ourselves.
I think it's really important, particularly on, for Indigenous people to, non-natives to educate themselves, because you don't learn anything in the school system here. Yeah. You don't. Maybe you get this half-assed story of what happened to some of our people, and it's only up to maybe the mid 1800s, which no wonder people don't think we exist. They think we were all killed off. So it's really important to speak with Native people when we're in the capacity of educating, not when we're just going about our daily lives.
Don't try to find one on the street.
Yeah, exactly. But to read the books that we write, read the articles, watch the documentaries that we make, listen to the music we make. If you do those things, you'll start to learn about us, and you'll start to learn about our histories and the fights we have. I feel like in my writing, I spend so much time doing Native 101 that I feel like I very rarely get to write about what I really want to write about. Right. And that can be frustrating. I had an editor recently for one of my articles ask me to shorten a Native person's name and to explain why their name was so long. It's like, my goodness, I have to educate non-natives just on what our names are. Which of course wouldn't be a question that they would ask someone from Europe with a really long name. Right. Exactly. Yeah. So with that, do you have examples of where people might be able to get started on that Native 101 so that that other natives don't have to be the ones to do it? The books that we write, documentaries, all of that I've said. I am working on, under Crushing Colonialism, the organization that I've founded, I'm actually working to do sort of a Native glossary of different terms, different policies, court cases, things of that nature, just to try to get people educated on that and to make my own writing a little easier so I don't have to repeatedly explain things. Indian country today, while they don't fully cover all of the issues in Indian country, as we call it, they're another good resource. Their articles are generally fairly easy to read, so you don't have to have a PhD to read them and understand them. And they talk about different issues, and they talk about different nations, and it's being written by Indigenous people. So, those resources are out there. I think the most important thing, though, is to make sure that people are looking to Indigenous academics or Indigenous words and wisdom, and not the white anthropologist who wrote about us. Yeah, I recently read something that 95% of Wikipedia entries are written by white men in Europe and North America. Mm-hmm. And I was like, wow, well, that not only does that explain a lot, but how fucked up is that the Wikipedia entries about the entire continent of Africa are written by some white dude in England or something. Well, who has the time and the resources to do that? Of course it's white men. They're the ones with the time and the resources. Which is also, of course, indicative of history, because, that's why our history books are so lame and whitewashed, is because it's white men writing those history books. It's not people who are that history that are actually writing them. So that was going to be the last question, but I thought of another one. So basically, this perspective on issues that are happening right now. A lot of people are talking about America needs to unite, and America needs to come together, and we can't be divided on these issues. Do you see first of all, is it worth fighting for a united America? And if so, what would that look like? Is it better to try and work in these communities on a smaller scale level with that sort of local perspective, rather than this great nation of America? Well, first of all, America was never great. It was founded on Native genocide, land theft, and slavery, and sexism, because women were excluded. So I think we need to stop looking to America to do right by oppressed people. It's never done right by us, and it never will. When I hear people talk about, we need to unite, it's always the most privileged of oppressed people saying that. That's their way of saying that I, as a two-spirit, I'm not supposed to speak up and call out, for lack of a better term, other queer people. As a Native, I'm not supposed to really throw our issues out there. I'm not supposed to throw out the issues of ableism that we have in America. I'm basically just supposed to be there to fight for crumbs.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm done fighting for crumbs. You know, I spent a decade working in the US government and Democratic and progressive politics, and the things I saw were horrible. I don't think the Democrats are any better than the Republicans. I don't think the liberals are any better than the right, because there is still so much oppression there. And I'm just not interested in keeping that going. I don't want that. And I think that because I believe so strongly in tribal sovereignty, we need to be working with Native people in terms of as a nation, as Native nations. But I think when we're doing that local work, we also have to think to the larger scale as well. Like, how does this fit in to the larger framework of America? And one of the easiest places I feel like we can see that is in resource extraction.
Right.
So many people got busy fighting DAPL that they forgot that DAPL eventually is going to basically end in Louisiana.
Mm-hmm.
So now there's the Bayou Bridge pipeline. You know, I mean, we think about in Pennsylvania, people fighting maybe just one pipeline with the Mariner East 2, but that whole area, the Ohio River Valley, is going to be fracked to death if we don't fight it. So I think it's important to think locally, but we still have to think on the larger global scale of these issues.
For more information on Jen and her work, check out jendeerenwater.com and her Facebook links, which are included at the end of the show and in the show description. And that will do it for this week's Dose of Dissent. Thank you so much for watching. Please spread and share this with all of your friends, foes, and people that you don't know. Again, as I just mentioned, check out that last slide and the show description to find sites that I mentioned in this week's show. And for interim updates, as well as posted videos, articles, and images, visit us on social media. And to those who have donated to keep us acting out, thank you so much. Please do keep spreading the word in order to ensure our ability to keep acting out. From the Devil's Den, good night and act out. And real quick, to keep independent, non-corporatized media like this show going, visit patreon.com/actout.
I can hear the boots are stomping. Come on, boys, let's get some rocks to throw. I can't stand to hear my father cry anymore. Sometimes we left one of you motherfuckers dead in the road. We've been backing up inch by inch. We got nowhere else.